that's one of those interesting things is do you really need to rewatch something to thoroughly enjoy it? Well, when I was 6, the answer was yeah. I mean, how many times did I see Star Wars? So, and I'm just wondering if maybe that's as I'm getting older, I don't need that repetition.
Welcome to Story Power, a bi-monthly podcast where my guests and I geek out about the stories we are passionate about in all different genres, styles, and formats. And we'll give a few recommendations to you, our listeners. Beware, possible spoilers ahead. My name is Lucinda Sage-Midgorden, and I started this podcast during the COVID-19 pandemic. As I watched the reaction of my social media circle, I noticed that many people turned to stories for comfort and help in making sense of the craziness going on around them. And as all good stories do, the world got even crazier. But, as Neil Gaiman says, fairy tales are more than true not because they tell us that dragons exist, but because they tell us that dragons can be beaten. Since I believe that stories have the power to show us the way and give us courage to keep going, I wanted to see if that was true for my guests as well. A year ago, my first Story Power guest was Dave Dahl. He's an expert in Shakespeare, so that episode was titled No Fear Shakespeare. But I know that Dave loves lots of different stories, so for episode 27, I wanted Dave to tell about his favorite stories and storytellers. I want to welcome you to the show. Welcome.
Pleasure to be here. I'm really enjoying this. And congratulations on a year. That's fantastic.
It's hard to believe a little bit. And last time we talked about Shakespeare, Dave. So I thought maybe we could talk about other stories that you really like.
Oh, there's so many. I've become, when you do theater for any length of time, there are always certain shows that you fall in love with, or certain ideas or certain plays you repeat, kind of again and again, because you always learn something different the older you get with them and the more you mature with them. Let's put it that way. And, I've got quite a few. One that I've always loved, I never liked it as much on book form, but once you see it in 3D space, in life and motion, how most people love Wuthering Heights when they're kids, or, when they're teenagers, and then it grows into a love that goes throughout their life. For me, it was Jane Eyre. I've always loved that one. And the stage adaptations have always hit me a little harder, I think. There's one recent one called Becoming Jane Eyre, where it's all about her young school years, and they actually spend the 2 hours developing how she finds the strength of will to become the governess for Rochester.
Yeah,
and, it's that the early part of that book is often glossed over, and yet it's so important for how they establish who this character becomes. And it's always been one of my favorites. And yes, it's horrible. It's just, how she learns so much from Helen, how to find some grace, because she hates them. And her life is spinning into a darker one where she's full of vengeance and bitterness and hate. And Helen is like, stop. Whoa, wait a minute.
Yeah.
It's one of the few characters in life that actually shapes her and forces her to look at other ways of interpreting a situation. And it's something I think our culture really now could benefit from. It's so easy to feel anger. It's so easy to feel hatred, but what's the opposite of that?
Right.
What do you do if you can move past it? So
yeah, and she does have one of the teachers is sort of on her side. So I'm going to stop here and say, I can't stand Wuthering Heights. My sister Celeste is the one who said this. Wuthering Heights is not a love story. It's a story of obsession. And that's how I always felt about it. There was something wrong with those two.
Well, one of the things that I always hate is how, you think of David Niven playing the brother, Linton, and that's so not the book character at all. The book character actually beats up Heathcliff so badly that Heathcliff runs around with a gun after that.
I forgot that.
Yeah, no, it's like a small little detail that's often brushed over. And, the only parts of the book I really enjoy were the last half, where the character, if I ever understood a character, is where they get into Harriet and Earnshaw, which is sort of like you said, he's the son of the drunken brother that, Heathcliff steals the house from, and Heathcliff treats him like dirt. But what he unwittingly does is he recreates his story with this character. Harriet deeply loves Heathcliff, and when he finds his Catherine, Heathcliff slowly starts to figure it out that they're in the same position he was. And he starts to develop a grudging appreciation for Harriet after treating him like crap for years. And Harriet is the only character that actually mourns Heathcliff's passing in any shape or form. Most of them are objective or cold about it, but this kid he's treated like crap is the one that actually sees him as a true parent. It's kind of sick, but it's also it's the one piece that you never see in a lot of the movies. Like the Laurence Olivier movie just focused on that sick relationship, and a lot of the more recent ones haven't really focused on that either. But there's a whole nother generational piece to the story that often gets missed or not told.
Well, I didn't like it at all. But so now let's go back to Jane Eyre, because I do love Jane Eyre. And I think you're right about that first part of the book. I noticed that a lot of books that were written, like Jane Austen and George Eliot, and also the Bronte sisters, do a lot of setting up of the story before the story actually kind of gets going. And so that whole school part is really, yes, there are things that happen when she's at school, but it's all setting up, well, like you said, her later life, her attitudes, and how she can stand up to Rochester and her aunt.
Well, and even leave when, she would be easy, and in her mind, I don't know if I can't remember if she actually says this or not in the book, but there's a moment where he says, just come away with me anyway. And she's tempted, but then she can't do it. She's so, because just her own conscience, her own strength won't let her do that. And it's interesting to me is what she learns from going to the mission, there's a whole nother section where she works with this couple. And in one movie, the Michael Fassbender movie, they made it into this kind of creepy, him being interested in her. And I never got that out of the text. In fact, what I got from the book is she learned how to develop a friendship with this young man. And she's tempted to go with him on his mission, but then realizes that's not right for her life. So by developing this casual, gentle friendship, she learns what she really values, and that she actually has passion for Rochester. But that whole section where she lives with the missionaries and sort of heals from, the events, lets her realize that she needs to go back and face it.
And then finding out that they're related to her. She's finally got family, loving
That's
family.
Right. That's right.
That's so cool. Yeah. I'm not sure I've ever seen Jane Eyre on stage. I've seen some Jane Austen on stage, but not that one. Well, do you have any other either plays or television shows that you just really love that you...
Oh, sure. Well, there's one I could talk about. How long do you have? Because we could spend 3 hours on my favorite show right now. And I could go forever, mostly because it's a book series, and the showrunners of this are obsessed with, if they can't tell exactly the book story, improving it, and they get the authors' buy-ins. It's called The Expanse, and it started out on Sci-Fi, and then it moved to Amazon, and it's going to complete next year with its 6th season. And basically what they did is they did something really kind of fun. They would take, with Sci-Fi, they started with the first book and they ended it halfway with season 1, and then used the first 5 episodes of season 2 to finish that book.
Oh,
and then they basically would do like a book and a half in a season. So you would get the continuation and finishing of one book into the next. And
Yeah.
it's the book series are there's going to be 9 of them, and the last one's coming out this year. So, and they're ending on book 6 just because 7, 8, and 9 have this huge time skip, and the technology completely shifts, and the showrunners and producers felt like they didn't have the ability to, first of all, you have to age your actors 20 years, and no, it's 30 years, and it's time skip in the book. And then you have to, age the effects, and some of it involves technology that they have to really think through. And they felt like they weren't ready to do that. So they're going to take a pause, and there's debate about what they're going to do with it. But it's such a great series. And the books are basically told in trilogy format. The first 3 books form the beginning chapters. Books 4, 5, and 6 tell another story. And then 7, 8, and 9 are the finishing parts of that story.
Oh, cool.
So,
that is one that Barry and I want to watch.
There's a lot of, they pay it. What the showrunner is a physicist. Mm-hmm. So, they pay attention to a lot of things, like there's nothing, a lot of the sci-fi tropes are subverted in this. Like there's no gravity on the ships. There's no artificial gravity unless they create it. And there's like all kinds of things, like inertia exists in the show. So you'll actually see the ships flying backwards for a period. Well, that's because they're slowing down to, meet their destination. So it's really wonderful, the kind of, and the attention to detail. They will set something up and it'll be easy to miss, and then it'll become a huge plot point like 4 or 5 episodes down the line.
Oh, so, I love that.
That's cool. No, they're very good about that. And the sci-fi writers, James S.A. Corey, are 2 writers. Mm-hmm. One of them worked for George R.R. Martin, and I think they learned a lot from him and they learned how to actually finish and focus and get things done. Mm-hmm. They were cranking out a book almost every 2 years for a while. And the last book is so ginormous, it's been 3 years. So, people are a little nervous, but it's going to come out in November, and they're going to finish their series.
Oh, so, cool.
The other one I'm kind of into, mostly because I love its kind of irreverent look at things. It's called Lower Decks, and it's a continuation of Star Trek. It's an animated series. Don't let that scare you. And it's very, if you love Star Trek, you love things Trek, you will love the show, because it doesn't just swipe at things. It does these little homages to them, and then the joke comes later. And it's not a show that makes me laugh out loud, but I have often found myself smiling during it and rewatching it, which has been one of my problems with like Star Trek Discovery and Picard. I didn't hate them, but I haven't rewatched them. That's one of those interesting things is do you really need to rewatch something to thoroughly enjoy it? Well, when I was 6, the answer was yeah. I mean, how many times did I see Star Wars? So, and I'm just wondering if maybe that's as I'm getting older, I don't need that repetition. But yet with Lower Decks, I find myself going back and rewatching it.
Oh, yeah. That sounds fun.
It doesn't mean the others are bad. I'm just wondering what is that piece, that makes us fall in love with something to the point of rereading it or rewatching it. What is that element? So it's one of those questions I'm fascinated with right now.
Yeah. Yes, because one of my other guests and I were talking about rewatching movies and television, and he has certain series that he will rewatch every year. And I like to do that too occasionally. I have a lot of movies that I rewatch. Mostly they're classic movies, but yeah. And the funny thing is that I didn't really do that with books, reread books very much. And then I sort of was given permission by Anne Bogle when she was talking to one of her guests on what should I read next. And I was like, I can reread a book that I really liked.
Well, it's funny you mentioned classics, because that's true too. Like a lot of my classic favorites have based on books. Like I love, and they both seem to star Derek Jacobi for some reason. I, Claudius has just been put on Amazon.
Yes.
And I love that series since I was a kid. I didn't always understand it, thank God, but I loved it.
Yeah.
The tone of it, the look, the colors, the focus on detail. And the other one are the Cadfael series, which they put on. Now, of course, as the series went on, they sort of departed from the books in big ways.
Yes. They totally decimated my favorite book. Totally.
Which one's your favorite?
It's the one about the kid who in the book, it's an actual miracle that the kid can walk again. And I cannot remember the name of it. And they totally messed it up in the series. They made it a hoax, and it's not a hoax. It's a real miracle in the book. I'll go look it up and put it in the show notes. I read all 21. I started in the fall and finished like on New Year's Eve or something.
Man, they are the best. I don't know, for lack of a term, I guess you could call it train reading, because the books are like maybe 200 pages sometimes.
Yeah.
They move fast.
I learned a lot. I learned a lot about the history of England and why Wales and England didn't get along. And his herb craft was so interesting, and how he made his concoctions, and then how he and the sheriff, he was the deputy sheriff in the beginning, and then he became the sheriff, how they would solve the crimes. I mean, that was really fun in the 1200s, or 1100s. That was really fun.
During a period, that people don't really pay much attention to, historians, and that it was this weird era after the Normans conquered and starting to settle down, that the King Stephen and Empress Maud and the whole deal of succession led to Henry II in the end taking the throne. But during those years, it was tumultuous and violent and weird, and yet it allowed for the lower classes weren't that much affected by it, so it led to a lot of growth in a lot of areas.
Yeah. The beginnings of the middle class.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You see that in that series.
Mm-hmm.
And I just, the entire cast is great, especially in the early days. Derek Jacobi, and I think Sean Pertwee was in it. And it's just got some great character.
Yeah, one of the things Barry and I did not like about it, because we watched it when it was originally aired on Masterpiece Mystery. We didn't like that they changed the guy who played the sheriff every year. I like the guy that played the sheriff the first year.
Yes.
But sometimes, and also sometimes the writers would totally misinterpret the relationship between the sheriff and Cadfael.
Yes.
And I didn't like that either. That was later on.
Especially when they tried to make this weird intimacy between the two of them. It just wasn't really there. They were friends. They trusted each other, but it wasn't father-son.
Right. No, because he had a son.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure I can't remember if that's in the series at all. It's in the books.
It is.
Yeah. He has a son.
It's implied.
He has a son that he didn't know he had, and he finds it out later. I liked both of those too. We watch a lot of Masterpiece Theater.
Yeah. The one I'm starting to get into, and I don't know how I'm going to feel about it. Everybody seems to be into Bridgerton, and there's even a parody. There's an Intimacy Direction spoof, which...
Oh, right.
It's a Saturday Night Live sketch around Bridgerton, and they have these two stuntmen come in to try to become intimacy coordinators. And I was laughing so hard I couldn't stop. So I don't know. I'm afraid it's going to ruin that moment in Bridgerton, man, because I'm going to remember, this was where those two guys said, "Can you touch him more?"
The thing that I like about the series, and some people are all up in arms about it, the first couple, they're just in the first book. The whole first book is about them. I've read all the books now. And the second book is about her older brother and his finding someone to love and marry. And it goes on like that. So it's about each of her siblings, Daphne's siblings, and how they, because they're romance novels. And I'm not a big romance novel fan, But sometimes as I was reading the books, I was laughing out loud at some of the stuff that the siblings do to each other. I mean, it was, and I hope they keep some of those elements in. Yeah, so there are fun things. The way the siblings have competitions, that's really fun to see the family dynamics of the Bridgerton family.
I love that.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny just to go along the same lines as, each one is a family.
We had some interference, and Dave was talking about Jane Austen offshoots.
People that try to, and I'm not talking about Jane Austen meets zombies, although that is a very funny series. But it's the fascination people have with Bennett and Mr. Darcy, for example. There's a mystery series that features the two of them.
Oh, right.
And
Death at Pemberley, are you talking about?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
And, I'm fascinated by a play currently by Lauren Gunderson called Miss Bennet's Christmas at Pemberley. We just did a reading of it, and it was really interesting to see how some of the actors knew Pride and Prejudice and some of them didn't. But it was funny to watch them interpret these characters, these classic characters from our 21st century perspective.
Yeah.
And it's an interesting play. It was fun to do that one. That's the story I deeply loved. And it was fun to watch the actors tell it.
That was fun. I was there and I watched it, and it was fun. And I can't wait to see it on stage now. The Arizona Theater Company years ago did a version of Pride and Prejudice, and it was really great. I loved the way the actors would help move the furniture around as they were transitioning from scene to scene. And whoever wrote that play version of it did a really good job, I thought.
There are 8 adaptations of it, including one. There's a 9th that goes all the way back to 1835. It was the first time it was staged.
Oh.
And it's in the public domain, and it tells a lot more of the story. It's a 5-act play, but it's interesting that the language, they've altered the language to shift, to suit more late 19th century design. So you'll be reading, if you read the book and then read a passage from it, you'll be like, what? Where did that come from? Because that's close to this, but that's not it. Right. And that's why is they tried to update it to the idioms and values of the time. So it may not be one of the most enduring adaptations, but it's one of those ones that shows you sometimes when you try to update things, it doesn't always go to your good.
Right. Right. Well, and that was one of the things that I think that maybe made Downton Abbey so popular, because they tried to make it as if those people were really living in the early 1900s, and their dialogue and their manners and the way they stood and sat and their clothing, and the separation between upstairs and downstairs. And because I don't know, sometimes I need a break from modern life. And so it's great to have. Now, Bridgerton, the costumes are a little bit they're more modern in some cases, but I thought that they fit the characters, and I enjoyed the whole series. So that's why I went and read the books, and now I can't wait to see each season and each, sibling and how they find love. And the mother is great. I love her. She's a great stabilizing influence throughout the whole series. So,
yeah, a friend of mine just loves it to the point where we actually went, and there's a place where I'm at close to Anchorage. It's run by this elderly Scottish couple, and they have a really fancy, almost palatial kind of home. And you actually get formal English tea, including even a tea cozy to put over the pot. Where you get the sandwiches, you get the cucumber. It's a formal high tea, and it's one of the most incredible things. And you get it in this beautiful home. with this large window that you get to see like the inlet, from where I am, and you get to see the trees and the mountains, and there's just this majestic scenery while you have this formal tea served by a charming Scottish woman and her husband.
That's great. How fun.
And it's very beautiful. The house is full of 19th century decorations, and even down to the clocks and the figurines on the wall. There's one wall that's like all silver and another of gold, and another where you see wooden figurines, and it's just gorgeous. It's kind of this fun chance to kind of dip into 100 years ago, and with a very formal tea. It's just really wonderful.
Oh, that sounds great. And one of the siblings marries a Scottish lord, so one of the books takes place mostly in Scotland.
Oh,
yeah. I think books maybe like Outlander got people sort of started on that whole loving period stuff. There's a whole group on Facebook of people who love period pieces, who love the books and the movies and the television shows. And it's really interesting to read their comments about the various shows and books and stuff. I don't engage very often because some of them have very definite ideas about them.
Oh, no, man. And fandom online is a scary thing. And some of them are really freaking scary.
Yeah.
They take it so far.
And they're so serious about it.
Oh, yeah. A few fandom groups I've ever belonged to are pretty careful about making sure, people stay civil, people stay. I mean, why are we doing that? When did fandom become about your rigid interpretation and whether or not you can allow another person to speak to you about it, And online, we take everything so personally and so seriously when you don't even know if that's the actual person's feelings or not, because, their name, it doesn't have to be them.
Yes.
I remember with fans, you used to have to sign your name to them, and you'd have to be responsible for what you sent in, potentially. And that seems to be, an anonymity. Well, even if it is an anonymity, it seems like there's a larger territoriality to fandom and gatekeep and more gatekeeping than ever before, which is weird.
Yes, it is weird. You're right. Yeah. I don't engage in those very often. Scott Hamilton, one of my guests recently and I were talking about WandaVision and how people were getting all bent out of shape about the way it started, and they weren't going to continue watching. And it was like, wait a minute, give it some time. Give it.
That's one of those ones where it starts. You need to know the eras that they are lampooning, or you will be confused and hopelessly lost, and maybe even angry. They're not everyone goes to the I Love Lucy bit, but what they're not realizing is she's spoofing Donna Reed, she's spoofing Ozzie and Harriet. They're spoofing a mishmash of 50 genres in that first episode. And then it goes to the 60s with the second, and the 70s and the 80s, and then most people will recognize the Modern Family touches, or the 2000s, but as each episode progresses, it's taking a different era, that has meaning to somebody,
right.
And if you see it for the pastiche and it's actually more of an homage to me. It's a pastiche and an homage. They're not lampooning them for the sake of lampooning them. They're not ripping them apart. They're actually lovingly putting these pieces and details together.
Right.
So I think it's the pastiche that could offend someone, that gets them confused. And just in case people don't know what I'm talking about, a pastiche is where I put 4 or 5 pieces together and then come up with a different piece. like there's a great piece in Crazy Ex-Girlfriend where she puts together Bruce Springsteen's style of songs and then he does it. And that's an example of a pastiche.
Right.
It's where you recall a former era or style and then put your own touch to it.
Right. Yeah.
And that's what WandaVision does for those first beginning episodes. It's not a literal connection to Leave It to Beaver. It's a mishmash of Beaver, Lucy, Ozzy. It's all
the Dick Van Dyke Show.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, that one comes up. Yeah.
And Bewitched and yeah.
I Dream of Jeannie.
Right.
Yeah. That's one of those things that's interesting to me is I tend to like mishmashes. I tend to like things that put things together. I have very strange kind of literary tastes. I like things that match and kind of squish things together. One of my current favorite plays that I've just read all the way through is called The Coward by Nick Jones. And it sets up an 18th century theme, but with the 21st century's gun identity and gun loving society. And then sets it back in the 1700s. Where dueling was allowed. And it's just this interesting blend of things, and it's a very goofy comedy. And I'm the more I read it, the more I loved it. It's one of those next ones I'm probably going to hold a reading for.
Oh, I think it would be fun to do that at the college too. Yeah.
The thing is, it's 7 men and 1 woman. It's kind of guy heavy.
Oh, that's true.
But I'm going to get into something kind of philosophical here, and it's going to be kind of weird, but just go with me on this, is that I am convinced, and not just in community theater, but professional as well. One of the strengths of a community theater especially is that your women are often the most contributors to it, and not just on stage, but, one of the first set designers was a woman that designed the box sets. Theater has always given women innovation and creative power, whether it's Roswitha writing the first closet dramas, in her Abbey in the 10th century, or Aphra Behn making her living from it. It's once women became more involved in the stage setting, you see them becoming more involved in the creative passions and creative involvements. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, I while doing a show with guys is going to be, it's an interesting idea. It's one that I don't think suits the true nature of theater anymore, or ever did, honestly. And that's why I like musicals that are so guy heavy. I'm like, what are we doing, man? Yeah. So, that's why I'm liking playwrights like Lauren Gunderson who seem to understand this. The guy that writes Lend Me a Tenor, Ken Ludwig, he also seems to understand this. He tends to write very strong roles for women as well. Mm-hmm. But also, it's not just, our costumers, our lighting designers, or in almost every facet, there's women involved in that. And I think it's just one of those things theater won't survive without that involvement.
Well, and it's interesting that women were not allowed to be on stage early on. It was all men playing all the parts, women's parts and children's parts, and if there were children. And that is just so strange to me, although they were protecting women, I suppose.
Well, when you consider that actors were also the lowest social stratus, in Rome and Greece, they were basically one step above slaves in some cases. Although in Athens, you actually find leading citizens and citizens of the voting public involved in production. But since the Reformation, women were appearing on stage in France even before. Right. After you get past the Restoration, you find a lot more involvement, and just even, even with Shakespeare, cross-gendering roles doesn't bother me.
Right. Yeah.
Especially if there's a good reason you can pull it off and you can do it. And it's not going to cause awkwardness for the actor. Then I think you can do it.
Well, yeah. And I'm thinking of times when actually they did do that. Like when Linda Hunt in The Year of Living Dangerously played a man. She played a man's role.
Well, Sarah Bernhardt played Hamlet multiple times. There are other women that have done it as well. I mean, but it's not, I guess what I'm saying is I think, in our craft and in our time, one of the things we miss is how heavily involved women actually have been and are continuing to be involved in our craft.
Mm-hmm.
During World War II, some of the most primarily great writers were also actresses. One of my favorite writers is Lucille Fletcher and Elspeth Eric, and a bunch that actually led, writing these series that I love anyway, the radio series like Suspense. A good number of those were written by women.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the best ones.
That's cool. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I don't know, my sister and I, we're recording this in April, and my sister and I are going to be talking, and it'll be the first episode in May, about classic movies and how there's this subtle feminism in them where women they just went off and did what they wanted to, or they decided they were going to live an unconventional life. And so we identified 5 actresses and 2 or 3 of each of their movies that we're going to talk about. They're just doing, they're just bucking the system and doing what they want to do. And
they're living it. They're living their belief instead of declaring them. Yeah.
Right.
Well, one of my favorites is Katharine Hepburn. The group theater approached her and, to be part of the ensemble. And she was like, I don't want to do that. I'm going to be a star, baby. I'm not doing that. And, one of my favorite characters of hers and is still Bringing Up Baby.
Oh, I know.
That woman completely, she was feminine and beautiful, and yet she had lived life absolutely her way, no matter how crazy it seemed.
Mm-hmm.
And, and yet it was Cary Grant's character that was the stiff tip, this is how life should be. This is how we should behave. And she completely upends his life. That movie still kills me. It's like whenever it's on, that's one of those rewatchable films for me.
Oh, yeah.
I don't care. I will stop and watch it again.
Yeah, it is fun.
There's a scene where she walks into a club and she tears the back of her dress. And so he realizes it. And so they do this bizarre dance routine to get her across the floor. And she only realizes it at the very last minute. And instead of panicking, she just goes, okay, we'll do it. She just kind of handles it.
Yes. Well, there are so many funny things in there. Like when you were mentioning the car, and she mistakes his car for her car, and
that's right. She steals his car. I forgot about that.
There's that, and oh my gosh, and then the wrong leopard. She gets the wrong leopard.
The dog burying the bone in the yard.
I know.
Well, he's supposed to have that important appointment. And he's digging holes, going, "I'll be back in a minute."
I know. So funny. It is funny. And, I was also thinking about Cary Grant because he is in a lot of movies with these strong women. And, like Rosalind Russell is one of the women that we're going to talk about. And that whole His Girl Friday, yes, he's conning her to come back, but in the end, she realizes that she doesn't want to be married, at least not married to the guy that she was engaged to. She wants to continue her career as a journalist.
Well, and that was such a fascinating gender swap of the original play, The Front Page.
Right.
Johnson in that one is more of an anti-hero in the play, The Front Page. He's much more he doesn't want to be involved, and he's trying to get out of it. And Burns manipulates him, the character Cary Grant plays, into actually pursuing this thing. And it's not until the one character commits almost suicide that he starts to care about it in the play. But the film, by gender swapping Hildy Johnson, it gave the film a little more stakes. It gave more of a reason why Burns was fighting so hard to keep this person.
Right.
Not just because it would upend his organization, because it upended his life.
Right.
And other, His Girl Friday is like, it's such a great film.
Yeah.
But also it's fun to just compare it to the original front page.
I don't think I've ever seen.
Yeah, there was a version with Adolphe Menjou, made 5 years before, and it tells the story. I mean, the front page has a lot of foul language in it, so it was meant to be, a stage play only in a lot of ways. Yet the film takes the one room set and uses it brilliantly.
Right.
Well, Ben Hecht was just a huge playwright of his time, and that's probably one of his most endearing scripts.
Is that the Ben Hecht that worked with Hitchcock?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Same guy. Okay.
Yeah, he started out as a playwright, and then also wrote film, and he wrote TV later, and he wrote radio. He just was everywhere.
He wrote a lot. He's not like me. I'm a slow writer. I'm a really slow writer. And I envy people who can, write fast. I'm not like that. I have to let things ruminate in my head for a while before I can write it down. Yeah.
No, I'm always envious of the guy that can go sit down in a room and 4 hours later have an episode done,
Oh, yeah.
They're out there, but I'm envious of them.
Yeah. And sometimes when Barry and I are watching television shows, I'll say, how did the writers come up with that thing, that's happening in the show? I don't know. Or they must have had so much fun, but how did they come up with that?
Well, writer's room, there's a lot of banter that goes on around, and a lot of things that can happen where these discussions, occur, and then you develop that idea and see what comes out. So that would be one thing that would be fun to do, is to be in the room as they're debating and figuring out story points, especially on a non-book show,
Yes.
Something that they don't have source material to go back to.
Right. Yeah. Studio 60 on the Sunset Strip was one of our all-time favorite shows, and it was only one season, unfortunately. But it was sort of like behind the scenes of a Saturday Night Live like show. And so they would show the writer's room and how things got really frantic sometimes in there. And I said to Barry one time, I don't think I could do that job because my mind doesn't work like that. I can't work that fast.
And the debates are meant to stir up and speed up your work process. So,
right.
Yeah.
Well, do you have any other stories or movies or books or television shows that you want to mention before we leave?
There are some that I would love to see more done with. There's a short story. I love short stories. I think mostly because my attention span is kind of like that of a fruit fly. I don't, I buzz around a lot and I don't pay attention very well. But I'd love to see more of the short stories of Le Farnu or de Maupassant turned into more full-length stories. Like Maupassant's story of the hand is only 5 pages long, but it's so good.
And
Graham Greene is another one I'd love to see his short stories done.
Oh, yeah. Who was the first one that you mentioned?
Le Farnu. He wrote He wrote short stories that usually involved supernatural themes, and he wrote not Man-Sized in Marble. What was the one he wrote? He wrote this one about a wooden statue that comes to life to claim the artist's girlfriend, artist's wife. And he wrote a bunch of other really good ones. He wrote this one about a werewolf, this woman that's a werewolf, and she's coming for the children of this guy because he broke his word to her. It's really good. he writes fast and taut, and some of his short stories are like legendary for their scariness. They're thrillers.
Did de Maupassant, did he write The Necklace?
Yeah, that's one of his short stories. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I've read that one.
Well, when I was a kid, there was a show that ran from 1974 to 1982, and it was an audio series. It was called the CBS Radio Mystery Theater, and they would do everything and anything. And they did a whole wealth of short stories and adapted them into an hour-long broadcast.
Uh-huh.
And I would sit there fascinated. I mean, it would usually come on at like 10 o'clock at night or 11 o'clock at night.
Mm-hmm.
So, I'd have to stay up on school nights to listen to it. Or otherwise, I couldn't go to sleep. And it would tell all these different kinds of stories. It went everything from Westerns to sci-fi to horror to mystery to romance sometimes. Mm-hmm. And it would tell all these different kinds of stories. And there were by the time it ended in 1982, there were roughly like 3,000 episodes. 1,499 of them were originally original scripts.
Wow.
And the original host was E.G. Marshall, and then a character actress named Tammy Grimes took over the narration after that.
Yeah.
But it's an amazing, amazing series, and it's still, all of the episodes have survived in some form, and you get the heightened advantage of hearing 1970s commercials sometimes.
And where can you find them? On YouTube?
Everywhere. There's also a podcast now on Apple that focuses on CBS Radio Mystery Theater. There's a whole bunch of different websites that carry them. If you really want to own the CDs, you can actually find them on eBay. But I recommend, you can listen to them for free online. And listen, it's a good one at night, where you just want to have an audio drama. And okay, some of the acting is 1940s stage, so just go with it. But some of it is, some of it isn't. A lot of the actors were known character actors for their day and for their radio work. And it's definitely a fun series.
That sounds fascinating. I love it.
Oh yeah, I loved it. Especially just, Hyman Brown, the guy that produced it, also did things like Inner Sanctum. And, when there was a fascination and nostalgia for what they call old time radio in the 70s. Mm-hmm. And, a lot of shows would have that. A lot of radio stations would have a version of that where you could hear some of the old shows. But at night, they would play CBS Radio Mystery Theater. And where I lived in Albuquerque, I had an old crystal. This is something else that makes me a child of the 70s. Remember crystal radios?
Oh, yeah.
And it would give me the AM band. And there was a station in Denver that was like a 50,000 watt signal. So you could get it at night, clear as a bell.
Wow, yeah.
And I would hook up my crystal radio to the window, put my earpiece in, stretch it all the way so I could get in bed. So in case somebody came in, I could whip the earpiece out. No, I'm asleep. But I would listen to the entire show.
Oh, wow, that's so cool. That's neat. I don't remember listening to radio a whole lot when I was growing up, but we lived in a lot of really small towns. So, right. It was sometimes hard to get radio. Wow, that's great. So I'll have to look that up. That's cool.
It's a fun one. It's a fun one.
So Dave, do you have anything else you want to say?
Well, really, I just want to thank you for bringing me back on here. I love this show. I love what you're doing with this, and the conversations are always so much fun. I hope this continues to grow and you get a larger audience as it goes.
Well, thank you. And it's always fun to talk to you. So like my sister, I'll probably have you come back again. Thank you very much. hope you enjoyed the show. If you like what you heard, please share it with a friend and give us a review on your favorite podcast app. It will help people find us. You'll find the show notes for this episode at my website, Sage Woman Chronicles, at sagewoman.life. You can leave a comment there. And remember, as Philip Pullman said, after nourishment, shelter, and companionship, stories are the thing we need most in the world. Until next time, this is Lucinda Sage-Midgorden. Thanks for listening.